Hey, everybody, this is Bishop John Seldis, and welcome to another edition of what we like to call Relevant Conversations with Guess Who? Me, John Seldis. I am glad to be with you tonight. Happy New Year. I guess we can still say that. I know we're 20-some days in, but it is still a brand new year, 2024. Can you imagine 2024? I thought for sure we'd be riding around in jet planes, and I'm a child of the '60s, so meet George Jetson and just all of that. I thought this was, I couldn't even imagine a future that looked like what we got going on, and so. But we do have these cars that drive on their own, but you better watch out. You better keep your hand on the wheel. That's why we say it that way. Why don't we just keep your hand on the wheel? Let this technology help us a bit better as it goes further down the way. I have the pleasure tonight to have somebody that I shared with them that I have stalked them for a little while here now, just from a distance, listening, watching, and cheering them on, and admiring their work and their thinking and their profession and confession and their public witness, And so we had recent time of connecting and reconnecting, or connecting and reconnecting, seeing one another. And I hit her up and said, "Hey, would you consider doing my show? And let's do what we call chop it up a little bit." And they agreed. And so I want to introduce the spiritual leader of here we go, Rabbi, here we go. Congregation B'nai Tikvoh-Sholom. I do. I did it. All right. And in Bloomfield, and she just told me a little bit about the beginnings of the congregation. It was a merger of two congregations, in fact. Teacher, spiritual leader. She's involved in a bunch of different things here locally and around the Northeast here. And I'm pleased she said yes to being a guest with us tonight. Come on, welcome with me to this platform, Rabbi Debra Cantor.
Hey, hi.
Hey there.
It's great to be on. It's great to be on.
I'm so glad to have you here. And what I thought we would do tonight is just do a little bit of conversation about. I entitled this episode the liberal religious landscape.
Mm.
So let me set it up a little bit. Let me at least try to get at it, and then let's see if what are your contributions to this notion. When I think of the liberal religious landscape, now of course there's a way in which liberal gets talked about in contrast to conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Liberal gets juxtaposed to fundamental, and liberal is to the left, conservative or fundamental to the right of center. Okay, but I'm also talking about. So I'm reminded, I, for a number of years, was a part of the pastoral staff of a congregation in Chicago, in Woodlawn. Actually, not Woodlawn. They would get me. They would get me if they heard me say that. Hyde Park. Excuse me.
Oh, Hyde Park. Love Hyde Park.
In fact, on the green.
Obamaville.
That's exactly right. We were blocks away from President and Mrs. Obama's house in Chicago.
Yep.
And Mrs. Obama, in fact, led a meeting in the building when she was the vice president of the University of Chicago's hospital. So,
right.
so yeah,
wow.
I didn't know who they were. I didn't remember that she was in that building. But anyway, the pastor of that church for 40 years, his name was Edward Scribner Ames. He's a fascinating guy. And during about 100 years ago, he was one of the leading voices in the liberal Christian tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And he used this term. So this term of liberalism as it relates to religion, he is attributed to have, given some heft to the conversation back then. He said this: the term liberalism seems to be developing a religious usage which gives its growing significance to this idea of contrasting it with fundamentalism, and signifies a far deeper meaning than just modernity or modernism. For him, he said, fundamentalism describes a relative uncritical attitude. It's a little pejorative, and he's doing a little bit. Okay, I'll go on. And in its custom, traditionalism and authoritarianism are dominant. There is no doubt that the loss of traditional faith has left many confused and rudderless, and they are finding that there is no adequate satisfaction in mere entertainment or excitement or in the flight of their finer ideals. He said they crave a sense of deeper meaning and direction for their lives. Therefore, religious liberalism, not as a cult, but is an attitude or a method, turning itself to the living realities in the actual task of building more significant individual and collective human life. I would call that community.
Yeah.
That was
and that was 100 years ago?
Yes, in 1936. So just 100 years ago. This was Edward Scribner Ames. He was an interesting guy, by the way. He and the congregation there at University Church Chicago posthumously made Abraham Lincoln a member. And there's a plaque. All right. I'll tell you another fun fact about that congregation. For about 40 years, they didn't raise an offering.
Really?
They had it's in the congregation in the narthex today.
Yeah.
There's a box that says offering, and you would slot whatever you wanted to put in there. And during his time there, his tenure there, if there was a need, the roof needed to get fixed, church needed a new organ, whatever the need was, he would go through the list of the higher known donors. Say, okay, it's your turn to ante up. And that's how they got stuff done in that congregation at that time. He was a fascinating read for me. But that was Scribner Ames, Edward Scribner Ames, talking about liberalism in religion. React to that, if you will.
Yeah, so it's 100 years later, right? The world, on the one hand, is completely different than it was then, and on the other hand, it's not. We live in a postmodern age when the promises of modernity, which we were very excited about, human beings were very excited about this, right? Because science and everything was progressing, right? And so there was this sense of humanity's getting better and better, and we have more and more insights, and it's all going to save us. That all exploded. One of the things that with these world wars, right, in the 20th century, and you had technology and science being put to destruction and murder and evil and the furtherance of evil. So what do you do when that gets, that whole notion gets exploded, like, we're getting better and better every day. So he is, I mean, I think some of the things he's pointing to. So we use these words and then we use them in different contexts, right? So I'm thinking liberalism is a political posture, right? And every so often, it gets people people on the progressives say, oh, liberals, they're just a bunch of jerks, and they don't believe in really changing things, and liberalism gets demonized by conservatives, right? But so that's in the political realm. And of course, in our day, like I'm talking right now, our own time, words get emptied of meaning. I mean, forget about big, conceptual terms. Words get emptied of meaning until they really, and you have political leaders, speaking, and out comes fruit salad, right? So this idea of liberalism then as applied to religion is interesting. One of the things, I do a lot of interfaith work, and I've taught at what used to be called Hartford Seminary, now HIU. I've sat on the board, Hartford, International University for Religion and Peace. It's a mouthful, but I've sat on their board now for many years, and so I used to teach in a program called Building Abrahamic Partnerships, BAP. And we would try to get approximately equal numbers of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and the same thing with the teaching, with the faculty. So, and we'd have like an academic paired with a person in the field. So I was a person in the field. I was the Jewish person in the field, not surprisingly, as a rabbi. So, so one of the things that we would always talk about is something that Christopher Stendhal, the great Christopher Stendhal, coined this term, holy envy. And holy envy is like, I look at your faith and I just, not only do it goes beyond tolerating, it goes beyond understanding. I like super admire this thing in your faith. And I want to also think about, could I take that admiration that I have for that beautiful thing in your faith that is not mine and bring it into my faith, right? So I will say this: Jews are not comfortable in general. Jews are not comfortable with God talk. And one of the pieces of holy envy that I have with both my Muslim and my Christian friends is like, they're talking about God all the time. And if I go to, if I'm teaching, a typical group of Jews, and I'd say to them, do you believe in God? I'm going to get, no, and sometimes people come over to me and say, well, Rabbi, look, I don't believe in God. And I say to them, I might not believe in the kind of, might not believe in that God that you have in your head, but if I say to Jews, those same Jews that, I don't believe in God, because we really bought into the whole modernity thing. After all, it led us into the larger the larger society. I mean, for a while. And I say to them, have you ever experienced God's presence? Have you ever experienced holiness in your life? Have you ever experienced the divine? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Then they'll come out with, of course, moments of connection with the source of all, with, because it's not about structuring some theological framework. It's about, what do we experience? And I agree with, what the Reverend wrote 100 years ago. People are looking for meaning. And with the breakdown of, small, close-knit communities and, breakdown of all kinds of things that broke down in modern times, even as there was great openness, like you can be part of this great larger society, you can be in a city, you can be in, you don't have to be in a place where everybody knows your name, you don't have to do what your father, mother, grandfather, grandmother did, but you're lonely. And what is life about? And you don't have community. So we are hungry for community, and we're hungry for meaning in our lives. And the question is, do communities of faith, as communities of faith, what do we bring to the table? How do we meet these needs that people have? So, you talk about liberalism. Am I liberal? Look, I grew up in a liberal, politically liberal family. Everybody was very active in the Democratic Party, and my Bubby and Zadie, my grandparents who came from Russia, they were like basically what a lot of Jews were then, which was, if you weren't religious, you were like sort of like a democratic socialist. And so, yeah, of course. But I grew up in a little town in Connecticut, lily white town, with the Congregational church in the middle of the, on the town green. And my friends went to Pilgrim Fellowship at the, and I was the only Jewish child in my grade. And there were maybe 3 Black families, 2 Asian families, not exactly diverse, although it's much more diverse now, shockingly. But I grew up thinking that here we are in Connecticut, and it's a good thing there's not racism here. That was all in the South. I grew up and things were happening in the South. People were going down and helping with voting rights, and my family was all for it. But I grew up thinking this crazy thing that racism, but first of all, you could be a racist, and they all lived in the South. And we had been on the right side of the Civil War and had been okay ever since, and that's great. And I didn't understand why there were Black people in Hartford who were upset about things. I'm just like, what's that about? So it wasn't till, and I'm telling you, I was from this liberal family, and, but I was a little white girl in Connecticut. I knew all about anti-Semitism. There was certainly anti-Semitism in my town. When I was in 7th grade, the boys in my class all did their book reports on Adolf Hitler, and I was the only Jewish child, so they, whatever. So, I mean, I was aware of that, but it's not till the recent years of my adulthood, not even young adulthood, that, I start to realize, okay, the limits of liberalism when you don't really get what was happening and what is happening, and about racism being structural, that there isn't just like some guy, it's not George Wallace who's the racist, but but we're all part of that. And that, and why was it that so many Black people were living in Hartford? Didn't they want to move out to a nicer place? No idea growing up, even in college, like no idea about redlining, no idea that the United States wouldn't have become the United States without, without the being built by Black people and chattel slavery and all that stuff. So, for me, these things are like revelations over the last maybe 10 years, 10, 12 years,
I can appreciate, thank you, first off, and wow. When I think of liberalism, I think of it, it's a broad swath. And of course, in our vernacular, we think, it's political, right? But it's also cultural.
Yeah.
There's an economics that's involved here. So the plate is wide when you think of what might we mean when we say the liberal religious landscape. What I can say is that it has evolved, it changes, it shifts. One of a colleague in the tradition I serve in wrote a book. He called it The Seeds of Racism. And he likened the staying power of race and racism to a religious a way that it morphs and changes and fits the season and the times and the eras like religion has. And it's quite a fascinating book and study that he engages in, and that it has a Puritan beginning here in the United States and in North America, and in particular here in New England. So it's fascinating to me, and I wanted to start there because much like with Scribner, Edward Scribner Ames, and the statement I read at the beginning, he is talking about what we would now call. There was a recent Pew study, and I'm fascinated with all this kind of stuff. So y'all forgive me for going a little in the weeds. But it talks about what we call the God gap, and you referenced it. So that's what made me think of Pew's research around this, where people would say, "Yeah, I'm not religious. I'm spiritual."
I'm spiritual. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that study. Yeah.
Okay. That sure did tell it. That said it. But at the same time, I know what they mean. I know what, there's an essence of trying to get at the meaning. And of course, that's what I'm on the search for. What does any of this actually mean? And what is its relevance to our lives and our both private, but just as importantly, our public witness? What do we do in relationship to how we believe and how we position ourselves and our God talk, but more importantly, our God living? What space does faith, God, or whatever you want to call it, the Great Spirit? I'm not so bound with the language. I am with what it means and how it shapes us. And so for me, in this moment, whether you're on the right or the left, I talk about it in terms of a human side, right? And what does it mean to struggle with what it means to be in community where we are different? We're the same, and yet we are different. We have different ideologies. We have different, philosophies. We have different ways we view the world. We enter spaces differently, and we're on the trajectory of growth, right? From our birth to our transition into the next life, and we'll grow some more. So here we are, Rabbi, and we're in a fascinating time. I never would have thought we'd be here, in my view, but here we are. Here we are. As much as our foreparents struggled against, for example, against what happened in the slave trade, and then enslavement period. As much as our foreparents struggled with the kinds of oppression that led them to leave their places of origin, seeking for a new home, seeking for new opportunities. The Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust in Germany, to what we're dealing with today. As much as we would have liked to say things are not the way it used to be, there's so many commonalities to what.
Oh my God.
Right?
Oh my God. Absolutely.
So
the
here
rhetoric.
We are. Yes. Here we are, and here you and I are in our region, struggling with our congregations, but also bearing witness in the public square, and feeling, sensing, and having a real sense of responsibility to say and speak our version of truth as we understand it and see it. Talk a little bit about the challenge of that in these days and times.
Oh, yeah. So one thing is that, and by the way, my Christian colleagues complain about this all the time, is that when people speak in the name of religion, the folks who are speaking, when we think about, especially because since the rise of the political, the religious right. So when people speak in the name of religion, they're very often not reflecting the deeply held values of lots of us, of lots of religious communities, right? So my colleagues, who are from liberal Christian denominations are appalled when they, have to deal with statements about, about poor people, about Mexican, I mean, like these inhumane kinds of things about other people, and they don't speak in the name of Christian. What you really think that's what Jesus represented? You really think that's what Jesus would say? Seriously? So, and for me also, I, as a religious leader, I feel like I have to speak out because there are multiple religious voices, and we can't just let the airwaves be so, just hear this narrow swath, very loud swath, but narrow swath of religious voices. So that's one thing that faces all of us, and that, pushes me personally to speak out, in public, in various public forums. Also, I think about right now, this moment that we're in, which I also did not anticipate at all, I really did not. I did not think that, and when I was a kid, it was the Vietnam War. It's not like people all agreed on things and things were just hunky-dory. Soldiers were being mown down in Vietnam. So no, and napalm, and there was a lot of horrible stuff going on. But I really didn't. I never dreamed that there would be a whole bunch of Americans, like in the mainstream, not like a couple of extremist wingnuts, but there would be a whole bunch of people that just want to dismantle democracy and install an authoritarian government. That I did not see coming. I really did not see coming. So we have that, and that's part of, what's going on in the United States. And honestly, as a Jew who has very close ties to Israel-Palestine, I mean, I see those same forces, those same anti-democratic forces in the Israeli government. And I see it, it's part of a global thing, right? You got Putin, you got Viktor Orban, you got these authoritarian strongmen, and there's an appeal. I mean, this is what astounds me. So it doesn't astound me that there are strong men in the world who want to seize power, but that people fall for the rhetoric of the fear mongering, of the hatred, of the splitting people, splitting groups, having groups be one against the other, so and lies, and the big lie, right? It's the same rhetoric as the Nazis used, the same stuff. And the Nazis didn't invent it either. They just, they just had a little better technology now. And now, now with social media, with the internet, right? So now it's just, really crazy. But I think one of the things that we feel, all of us, is there's so many big things going on, scary things, right? Threats to democracy, wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, Russia trying to take over, all kinds of geopolitical stuff. I'm not a geopolitical expert. I'm just a rabbi, So and environmental devastation. I read an article last week that was the sadness of no more snow. Like for people who grew up, where it snowed, like here. I can't find my boots, by the way, my snow boots. I haven't worn them in 2 years. And so I went into a crisis when oh my God, it's going to snow. I can't find the snow boots, So we have environmental degradation. All of these things are so big and they're so out of our hands that what it does to us as individuals and even as communities is to make us feel completely powerless. So what do? We either shut off, or we walk around incredibly anxious, right? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Neither one of those helps anyone, right? I have congregants calling me, especially since October 7th, they're terrified and they can't sleep. And I have coffee with them and I say to them, where are you getting your news? And they say, oh, well, Rabbi, I have, CNN on 24 hours a day. Whatever they tell. Okay, first, let's turn it off. Let's stop scrolling. Here's how much time you need every single day to keep up with what's going on. And by the way, if something huge happens, you'll hear about it. Don't worry. But what can you do? What can we do in our little sphere of influence? Here we are. We're living in Greater Hartford, in Connecticut. What can we do here? What can we do in our families? What can we do in our communities? What can we do for one another? I've been sending my congregants all kinds of things, and I send them poems. I send them poetry. I send them poems about kindness, about understanding, about not letting us give in to the fear mongering, and not letting us get put against each other, because that's another really good method of authoritarians, just oh, let's get the Jews and the blacks, let's get them, let's get these poor folks in the United States, let's get them all, excited about the refugees who are, coming. I mean, let's get everybody, at loggerheads so that we can just take over. We can't succumb to that.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, Rabbi. That for me, and I this is contested space, like you for me. That there isn't one religious voice. There are many religious voices.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't just one truth within one tradition. There are multiple truths within a tradition. And I want to contend that as a follower of Jesus, who have, and I say this amongst Christians and they get mad at me, Jesus was a Jew, by the way.
Yeah, he lived as a Jew. Yeah, absolutely.
He's a Palestinian Jew. So, let's be, let's be clear. And I know I just, made some people mad because, okay, you deal with that and then we'll come back to it again. But I want to continue to struggle with, and in this contested space, that there's not one way to view any of it. And quite frankly, if you want to try to get to what's authentic, right? The community piece. It's what we value in mutual respect and regard and love.
Yeah.
I think all of our faith traditions have a version of this thing that says God is maybe closer to love than hate. Maybe
well, it can get perverted, but no,
right.
at its heart, yeah,
that's right.
God is love, right?
That there's just, I say it this way: there's some things that are just right, and there's some things that are just wrong. Now we can argue the details, we can get down in the weeds of it, but we don't have a need of somebody to teach us right and wrong too much. There's some stuff, what color this is or what shade this is. But there's some right and wrong, and touch that stove, you might, on a hot stove, you might get burned. In fact, there is not a might. You will get burned. I mean, there's some, we can't argue that too much. I mean, you might want to, but okay. So, and for me, it holds true across the spectrum, whether we're talking about economics, whether we're talking about, politics, whether we're talking about service, whether we're talking about, whatever we're talking about, in these large geopolitical realities. Yes, in Palestine, Israel right now, there's trouble. That's trouble. And I'm going to name it. And it's been trouble. It just didn't get to be trouble. It's been trouble, right? In Ukraine and Russia, that's trouble. In the Congo, it's trouble. In Venezuela, it's trouble. In Bolivia and Colombia, it's trouble. In the United States of America, we got trouble. I'm from where Bubba and Billy Bob come from, out in the Midwest. Trouble. We got trouble out there. And we got trouble right here. The vast majority of our urban centers here in Connecticut and New England, for that matter, but here in Connecticut, are colored cities, towns, in a sea of other towns that are not. Right? There are 169 towns here in Connecticut. And our urban centers are colored, but everything else is pretty lily white. Of a little few.
We are more racially divided in our rich little state than almost anywhere else in the United States.
That's exactly right.
As someone who grew up here, that was an astounding fact for me to learn.
That's right. So we gotta contend and contest. And in the Christian tradition, we talk about contending for the faith, right? There's this idea of what the struggle is to do the work of understanding ourselves as not just ourselves alone, and how we do that within the range of stuff that's happening out here is the struggle. That's the struggle for me.
Yeah, I'm very involved in GIA, the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance, and we started meeting. We have a clergy caucus meeting actually tomorrow, but we started a group of interfaith clergy. We met for 3 years before we launched this community organizing, big, faith-based organization. And I tell you that we started meeting in the fall of 2016. My first meeting, I did not attend the first meeting, which was because I was in the middle of the fall Jewish holidays. But I attended the second meeting, which happened in late November 2016, if you'll remember the events of that month and that year. So I first will posit that I think whatever shred of sanity I had during those years was enabled by every month meeting with these amazing clergy colleagues. And one of the huge things immediately that came up was, now, what were the big obstacles? It wasn't doing interfaith stuff. Now, lots of us were, involved in interfaith stuff for years. It was, the suburban urban divide. It was racial divides, and even the racial divide, not so bad. But, in Connecticut, we've this stupid 169, separate little fiefdoms. And, we don't think in terms of greater anything, greater Hartford, greater this, greater that. We don't think in those terms. That's a very New England-y thing, when in New England, the Puritans who would have these little congregational churches, and then there'd be First Congregational Church. You know why? Because people got mad at each other, and they took their marbles and they went they Second Congregational Church. That's what we do in New England. We take our marbles and we go off and we do it for ourselves. In the Midwest, by the way, churches, synagogues, they're big. They're all big because they have it's just a different approach. It's a different approach. They find a way to live together. Now you might, there's downsides of Midwestern culture too, for sure. But this is something, so we have to first have a different view of who we are, who is in our community. And so if the people in our community do not include the people that are, 3 miles away from where I'm living, and if we can't transcend those town and city lines, we can't do anything. So that's at the heart of, that's really at the heart of what my GIA colleagues and I really believe. We have to see ourselves, we have to see community in terms of, our little church or synagogue or mosque communities, but beyond that we're part of these larger communities. And certainly Greater Hartford and certainly Connecticut, we are part of that. What affects one affects the other. And so that, that's like a mental shift, because it's not what's embedded in our Yankee culture here is something very different, very different. And yeah,
I live it every day. And it was something when I arrived here nearly 24 years.
Oh yeah, you're from the Midwest.
I am from the Midwest. And so when my beloved and I, my wife Pamela and I arrived here with our children, it was a bit of culture shock that it took us some time to adjust to this kind of parochial nature of it all. And of course there's parochialness everywhere, right? But there's a way in which this happens here in the birthplace of what this so-called democracy looks like. I mean, when you think of colonial America, you think of New England, right? You think of John Adams, and you don't so much think about it in terms of well, you do. George Washington, he was Virginian, right? Thomas Jefferson, a Virginian. So the Virginia guys.
They had some good ideas. They had some good impulses, and they were major slaveholders.
Right. That's it. Yeah. That's the problem is, and our founding documents, this stuff gets embedded in a really weird kind of way.
Baked in.
It gets embedded, and then we have these folk who are interpreting. So we got Supreme Court justices and other folk who are interpreting what the founding fathers.
Oh my God, the originalists, the founding fathers. I'm like, what the hell is this? You want to go back? These guys were slaveholders, most of them. And you know what? They weren't even in favor of, I know there's beautiful language, in the Declaration of Independence, and, lovely ideas. But when they said all men are created equal, first of all, they certainly didn't include women. Secondly, not only didn't they include Black men, they didn't even include, they were thinking, they were like white rich men. They weren't even typical of white men. They meant, people who were rich,
Who would like them? Who would
who
just
were
like
like
them?
them. Because you know what? They were human and they were people of their time, and they thought, like we all do to some extent, oh, isn't everybody like me? Doesn't everybody think like me? Yeah. Okay. But you know what? To say that we have to go back to the original 10, God forbid. I can't vote then.
This is what I did a session just recently, and I reminded folks that here in Connecticut, I'm going to be very specific.
Mm-hmm.
In order to vote, you had to be a member of a church, largely congregational.
Yeah. By the way, Jews can vote here for a very long time.
That's exactly right. You had to be a member of a church. It was a congregational first, an Episcopalian second, and then maybe a Catholic church third.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the Catholics.
There's a little
dicey.
Yeah. And you had to own property.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
If we applied that right now, across the board, okay.
That's
you and I.
The originalist. Yeah. You want to go back to the originalist interpretation?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. But you know what? To do that means erasing history. And when we erase history, there's something really wrong. When I was growing up, it was the Cold War. And this is something we learned about the evil Soviet Union, that they don't teach the real history, that they took their history books and they took out all the stuff that would reflect badly. And you don't think that's happening now? Yeah. Of course it's happening now, because
we're banning books.
Banning books, banning history. Oh, you don't want to make little kids feel bad. That's something, Oh
it's so Rabbi, we're getting pretty close to the end, not quite yet, but we're getting close. And I want to spend a little bit of time on you and I work together and with other faith leaders in this state, in the region and the state, doing our very best to lift our pulpits, as much as we can, and to lift our public witness to the plight of those who are on the margins of our communities, on the margins of our societies, those who are catching hell in a even more intense kind of way, and we're wanting change. We're trying to build for change and do that vis-a-vis power. And what I would call, I use power in a different kind of context than some community-based, faith-based organizers, but power. And I would say, in addition to power, it really is the moral authority that comes with who we are in our public witness, right? So I'd use those terms, and I know you do too. Here we are. We have pretty broad, call to do something different. And, whether that's, activate the vote, which we're certainly in need of. Maybe either we're going to activate the vote or create something else.
So
that we're actually doing something that's actually, for folk, instead of not for, for the masses of folk, rather than for the small number of folk who it seems, much of what our public legislation and public policy is geared toward. What would you say, and speak in your Jewish self, as if you could speak any other way, but what are the struggles that you see as you contend and lead folk, contend in the public way, but also do your best to draw in and lead a congregation? How are you doing that? What are you applying, to the work?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think today in my, I got an email about what, now that we're going into an election year, what are you allowed and not allowed to do as 501c3, and as in terms of separation of church and state. You're not supposed to get up and talk about specific candidates and I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that because, and I tell this to my younger colleagues, just speak from Torah in its widest sense, Jewish teaching in its widest sense and its deepest sense, and you will not go wrong. You don't have to talk about politics because, of course, values are political. Where we put our money is political. Where state and town budgets, where money goes is political. But it's not overtly political in terms of I'm voting for this guy or that woman or support, right? You speak to what your values are. And what are our values? Our values they're rooted in Deuteronomy. They're rooted in the words of the prophets. And not much has changed. The prophet Amos, the prophet Amos, went to the city and he saw what the terrible things were that were going on. He saw those urban ills, and we still have the same stuff. And he said, and Isaiah said, what do you think, in God's name, what do you think I want? You think I want you to sacrifice more bulls and sheep? No, what I want you to do is take the homeless person into your home. I want you to feed the hungry. I want you to make sure that there's justice. I want you, these are the things I want you to do. I want you to care for one another. And so what we might disagree, that's where and then all the rest of, and what follows from the rest of rabbinic and Jewish literature is rooted in those ideas. What we might disagree about, and Jews, we are always arguing, but what we might disagree about are, politically, what are the means? So when I was growing up, and you could be an ethical Republican in those days, what we might disagree on, like, should government, in terms of caring for the poor, right? Should government take on more of that responsibility, or should religious institutions, or should individuals take on more of that responsibility? That was a means to an end, but we could all agree poor people should be taken care of, right? And now we live in a time where that's up for grabs. That's up for grabs. Those people are vermin. Those people are criminals. Those people, you're right. When we dehumanize, when we hear that kind of language of dehumanization, we got to push back, because language is powerful, and language shapes what we do. And we have to keep recentering ourselves on what do we believe in? What do we believe in? And we got to fight for those things. So what would Jesus do? What does God call us to do? What do the prophets call us to do? What are Muhammad's, the teachings of Muhammad in the Quran and the Hadith that say that the value of a human life, if you save one human life, you have saved an entire universe. If you destroy one human life, you've destroyed an entire universe. That is in all of our traditions. It's in all of our traditions. And we just forget in all of the nonsense and all of the rhetoric. And we say, oh, well, we gotta push back on that. It's not okay. The words we use, the dehumanization, evil thrives on dehumanizing the other. And we have to stand up against that.
I'm reminded of Dr. King when you talk about the prophet Amos, and he would often in his deliveries and speeches quote from there, and that somehow we can't stop until justice rolls down like water,
like a mighty stream.
And righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. I'm quoting King James version. My grandmother said that's the only
very poetic. King James Version, very
King
good.
James is just, you can't, it's something. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's something
I
about
know. I love that. I love that translation. I do. I do.
You can't remake that one, and it sounds
beautiful.
That's exactly right. It is in this call, this call for those of us of faith to rise to the moment, and I believe just like with our foreparents of justice before. For me, that's lodged in a Denmark VC or a Nat Turner, who were resisting. That's a young Frederick Douglass, of the abolitionist tradition. It would like, and I can go down the Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, these resistors. Of the tradition I grew up learning, and these heroines and heroes that I learned and grew up with, their struggle was to not only for themselves, not only for themselves, but also for their children and for their children's children and their community. Harriet Tubman didn't just go back down south on the railroad to grab her family.
Correct.
She also went back to grab some of my family and other folks' family. And by the way, she was then deputized to help the Union Army figure out how they go.
No kidding. Yeah. I mean, and you know what? When people are searching for meaning, this is also what gives your life meaning, is to work now in whatever sphere of influence you have. Right? Small or large. Everybody has some sphere of influence, to work so that the world in the future is that the world now, but also we're working for future generations. Not just for our own children. I have children. I want them to be well but I'm not working just for my particular children. I want the world to be a better place. I want there to be less war. I want there to be less gun violence. I want there to be, I want it to be a cleaner earth. Yeah.
Yeah, I want everybody to have the right to go down there and get a job if they want it.
Yeah.
Go sign something and go sign up, stand in line there, and then the job get coming, right? If you want somewhere to live, right now, living outdoors it's
oh my God.
Can't do it.
That cold snap that we just had, right? It's getting a little warmer now. So I'm thinking about all these unhoused people in our state, and the state proclaimed everybody's got to go inside, and I'm thinking, okay, where are people going to go inside? I had a congregant, wonderful guy. His name was Alan Kaplan, and he was head of human services in one of the towns in Connecticut. And what he used to do on a cold night, like those nights we've been having, he'd go out and he'd go look under bridges. He knew where people were who had no homes. And he would pick them up and he would bring them inside. He would bring them into, a shelter or whatever. And every cold night that we have, I think about Alan Kaplan, who drove out in his car and drove around to find the people who were in the cold. And I think to myself, in his memory, now I'm not going to go drive in my car and go under bridges and look for people, but in his memory, I got to do something to address this. I have to.
Yeah. And that's what I believe our bearing witness has to name. It's gotta stand in the midst of the public square, and herald that there's a different way to be. There is a different way to live, and in all of our striving, it can't just stop with me and mine. It's got to turn to we and our. It's got to turn there, and that there are some things we can do. when we speak of and when we turn our attention to the we and our, there are some things we can do. The stuff I'm talking about is not rocket science.
No, it's not. It's not.
You know, it's just not. I mean, this is just simple stuff. You know, somewhere to live, get some food. You know, some healthy, nutritious food. It's crazy to me that we only have
deserts in cities. The food deserts in cities. Come on.
It's just unbelievable to me, and yet in our urban centers here in New England, it still is the case. You got to have a vehicle, because public transit, you can forget that. Getting from one town to the next, you forget that. And of course, you know, there are no poor people that live in the suburbs. All of them get shipped down to the urban centers, where all the services are housed and lodged in, and then we got to fight for the crumbs while others are in. Anyway, I'm going to meddling instead of sharing. I've gone to meddling. Rabbi, can we do this again?
Oh, that would be so fun. I would love it.
I appreciate you jumping on tonight with me, and we're spending just a little bit of time talking about what I'm very passionate about, what I believe I've been called to do, and you as well. It's been a great pleasure chopping it up with you.
We call it schmoozing, Bishop.
Schmoozing. Okay, just schmoozing. All right,
chopping it up.
Chopping it up. That's right. We're having a little cultural exchange right there.
Absolutely. Right here.
That's right here.
Yeah, we're doing
it. And my prayer is that we continue to do the work of calling people into a reality, or calling people out. I don't get into the back and forth. I do all of it. The call is clear, and it's clarion call. There's a kind of sharpness to it, especially right now. To that which benefits us all, and not just a few of us. It's got to be for the many of us. And I appreciate your public witness and your stand for justice in the world, and here in Connecticut and in our community. I appreciate you. Folks, we'll be back at you again. Same bat channel, same bat time, or thereabouts. Again, I'm a product of the 60s. So, you know, it's been my pleasure. And
my honor.
All righty. Blessings to you. See you all later, everybody. Peace.
Peace.